Today I'm going to talk about how can governments kill Bitcoin, or are they able to? This is a question I get often, and I've been in crypto for 8 years. Tons of people go, well, Dan, can Bitcoin survive the government trying to shut it down? And that's what we'll dig into today. We'll go through the common arguments and we'll debunk those and go through what that situation would look like. And so now I'm going to switch over to the walkthrough. This is a part of my newsletter. So my newsletter comes out on Thursdays. This is the first place where you'll get this sort of content. It's free to sign up for. It's the Dan Held Substack email newsletter. And this came out Thursday. And the topic is, can governments kill Bitcoin? And now I pulled this from V for Vendetta. And there's a scene in V for Vendetta where he says that ideas are bulletproof, which is true. You can't kill an idea. Bitcoin isn't just code, it's a mindset. To kill Bitcoin, you have to kill the version of Bitcoin in every single person's mind. You know, when we collect our stored energy and time and we store that in Bitcoin's ledger, that ledger value represents Bitcoin to us. If there was ever a flaw in Bitcoin to where like we had to roll back the code, or if there was ever a moment where we had to go back in time, that ledger that UTXO said is really the value, the aggregate shared illusion of wealth and value in Bitcoin. So even if you try to kill Bitcoin, you can't kill the idea of not only the ledger values, but that plus the attitude. People have already gone through the very deep rabbit hole that a lot of people have gone down that are listening to this, which is that you have to question the nature of the state of your government and why they govern you, and of money. And that's a really, really long, very, very deep topic that most people never broach in their life because it's kind of scary. And so, you know, when one of the quotes I really liked when I wrote this was Parker Lewis's quote: "To believe that all the people in the world that have adopted Bitcoin for financial freedom and sovereignty, for the financial freedom and sovereignty that it provides, would suddenly lay down and accept the ultimate infringement of that freedom is not rational." And he got that from his article, Bitcoin Cannot Be Banned, which I recommend everyone check out. And so I totally agree with his sentiment. It's something where I just don't see a realistic scenario in which Bitcoiners ever give up. Once you've gotten that mind virus, I'm not sure if that's as appropriate now during COVID, but once Bitcoin has infected you and you've seen the light, you've taken the pill that awakens you, you can't go back to that old system. And so the next section is don't flinch. Faith is required to make it all work. And fiat currency is only backed by faith of those who hold it and the government that issues it. Bitcoin is the same thing. And so if governments, which are recognized by most of their citizens as omnipotent, to where they represent complete control over the economy and people's lives, if they flinch because they're scared of Bitcoin by saying we don't like this, we're going to ban it, then that signals to their citizens that they're scared of it. And this is the first moment they've ever seen their government scared of something. Maybe they've seen the government posture in sort of military-like situations, but they've never seen their government scared of something that the citizens have been doing to this level. So if you flinch, you lose. It's it's something that I first covered in a few tweets I put out. Here's a good one by Jerome Powell from the Fed. And so you're essentially trusting an old man in a suit who has to say this.
Path for some time, which means that the debt is growing faster than the economy. This is not the time to act on those concerns. This is the time to use the great fiscal power of the United States to do what we can to support the economy and try to get through this with as little damage to the longer run productive.
An old man is telling you to trust him, but he has barely any data to back up what he's talking about. There is very little information that historically that can prove that his strategies will work. Trust us is the common quote. And here's another good one from the FDIC.
Unprecedented time. At a time of a pandemic like this, it is way too easy to get confused and to have fear about what you should be doing with your money in your accounts, especially as you're looking at the volatility in the stock market and the financial sector. This is what I would like you to take away from this. Your money is safe at the banks. The last thing you should be doing is pulling your money out of the banks now.
Wait, so like, you got to put an old person on TV and they got to tell me that my money is safe? I mean, why shouldn't I be able to trust it via like very rigorous sort of mechanisms? I mean, this is For them to put out a YouTube video and this represents safety is kind of nuts. That this is the way that they reinforce safety. So if they start to flinch and they look at Bitcoin as a threat, it's the social media networks will take that flinching and really exacerbate it and make it really, really apparent to everyone else that these central banks are scared of Bitcoin. And then another point is that trying to ban it might increase its visibility. This is called the Barbara Streisand effect, which is the social phenomenon that occurs when an attempt to hide, remove, or censor information has the unintended consequence of further publicizing the information. This is from Barbara Streisand, who tried to suppress a photograph of her private residence, which was then shared on the internet even more widely, and now the term is named after her. So that's an unintended consequence of trying to hide or mitigate interest around Bitcoin. The enemy of the enemy is your friend. So universal shutdown is impossible due to the coordination problem. You have to get every single government across the world all to agree together to ban Bitcoin at once. Even if you do so, you still can't stop the peer-to-peer trading, and you've also angered a large percentage of the world's population. If Bitcoin is a threat to one country or one government, it means that it's an ally to another. The enemy of the enemy is your friend. So I just don't see it very realistic that like China, Russia, and the US would all choose to ban it at once, considering that they might evaluate it as a potential way to hurt the other one. And then when we look at global warming and the collective political action of governments across the world, we have pages and pages of different types of agreements that have been tried to put together over time, of governments trying to work together to solve what they perceive as, this big problem. So if it's taken them this long to solve something that, it seems to be a large percentage of their population cares about, then I find it unlikely that they could go ban Bitcoin very easily. Especially if Bitcoin is rising in popularity, and that means that people are moving their money and not trusting their government, means that the governments, people are really this is starting to reach a critical point, and governments across the world are going to look at each other more competitively. How do we keep citizens within our own country from fleeing because of our poor taxes, poor tax situation, or economic situation? There's also the possibility that governments across the world could unanimously decide to fall back on the gold standard. I find this pretty unlikely. It wouldn't solve the underlying problem of trusting governments. I wouldn't trust their audits of their gold reserves, would you? Once you go Bitcoin, you don't go back. There's no way that we're going to go back to a old metal that we hold in a vault. We've evolved to the next stage of money, which is Bitcoin. You can't prohibit free choice. Both China and India have tried to ban Bitcoin with little success, and there's other examples of how prohibition hasn't worked. For example, the drug wars. So a good chunk of people have tried marijuana, despite this is the duration of the drug wars since 1969 through now, and there is no negative impact of drug wars impacting the amount of Americans smoking marijuana. Most people have tried marijuana in the US. I believe over 50% have by now. And then this was back in 2013, so this number has increased even larger since then. And also there's a bit of a hypocrisy thing here where, for example, in the fiat world, you've got investment banks paying hundreds of billions of dollars in fines. We see a similar function in the drug world where in 1 year alone, 68,000 people in the US died from drug overdoses. And those are from mainly opioids, which are illegal, for example, like hydrocodone and Oxycontin. Free speech. You can't ban free speech. There's a reason why it's called the First Amendment. It is one of the most important principles of America and what we care about. Other countries have similar sort of structures in place. And when you think about Bitcoin, it's just code, and that's a form of free speech. In the 1990s, encryption was considered the same thing, to where cypherpunks had encryption code on T-shirts. And back in that day, the U.S. government tried to ban what they were doing because they considered that to be like a weapon, but they were like, look, it's free speech. We see a more modern example where Cody Wilson had a 3D printed gun company, and they published the 3D printed source code on the internet for anyone to download. And they ultimately essentially won against the state. So against the U.S. Department of State, they took Cody to court. They decided to settle and allow him to distribute the files, given that the judge basically told them that they were going to lose. So it seems that even with an extreme example of 3D printed guns, which by the way, I'm a very much a libertarian, so people are free to do what they like with that information. I'm Bitcoin is freedom of speech. Printing guns are the same sort of thing. So I think that, this is a prime example of what most people, I'm talking in aggregate, like most of the population would consider a pretty out there sort of liberal mindset to allow 3D printed guns to exist. Even with that, the US government has withheld the ability for people to defend their freedom of speech. Finally, we have gold. So in the US, under Executive Order 6102, gold was banned in 1933. But it didn't lose its value or fade away, and other governments didn't ban it. So it essentially didn't really do much. For US citizens, they had a little bit of a restricted access to it. Most US citizens still held it, by the way. It was a widely broken rule. And other countries, that rule wasn't in place in other countries. Bitcoin also is distinctively different than gold in terms of its portability, divisibility, and verifiability, which makes it even harder to stamp out than gold. So how does Bitcoin win? Bitcoin wins, I believe, through market penetration. As Bitcoin's price increases, the proof of work security, or the security spend of the Bitcoin network, increases as well. I cover that in my article here, so if you'd like, check out this article online. It's called Bitcoin Security is Fine, and here's a chart to show that it is going to be okay. Now, the block reward is the amount of value that is given to Bitcoin miners to reward them for behaving properly and structuring transactions in the right way, or ordering transactions in the right way. The block reward is comprised of both the subsidy, which is newly minted Bitcoins, and transaction fees. Over time, transaction fees have to replace the subsidy. Luckily, through the Bitcoin bull runs, as we see in 2017, or 2018, 2017, 2013, transaction fees have continually risen over time, and they are slowly replacing the subsidy in the block reward. That means that Bitcoin's long-term security is fine, but it also means that adoption is how we increase the amount of money spent in transaction fees, which thereby secure the network. Transaction fees are not a bad thing. It's what secures the Bitcoin network. And as we're seeing, these transaction fees are increasing. More adoption means it, by the way, this chart is logarithmic. Here's a linear version. I think this really puts it into focus how big adoption means for transaction fees rising. So on a log chart, you can see this kind of smooth arc over time. So adoption is a key to that core fundamental tenet of any blockchain, by the way. This isn't just Bitcoin's blockchain. And then if 20 to 50% of a country's population owns Bitcoin, it'd be very unpopular to ban. Can you imagine a senator or president banning Bitcoin? 20 to 50% of the population won't vote for you in the next election. It incentivizes the politicians to behave properly and not ban it. By owning Bitcoin, you've now given everyone a skin in the game vote to keep it alive. And as a capital, it's very fluid, which means citizens can quickly move that money outside of another state's jurisdiction versus, say, your home, which most people, a large portion of their net worth is in their home. That's not easily sold or transferable. Bitcoin, you can just memorize it or carry it on a USB or hide it almost anywhere. Good luck, penalizing your citizens, especially a large portion of them when that happens. I think that ultimately Bitcoin's hard to understand nature and disregard by most of the population has been a blessing in disguise. As it rises in value and prominence, it becomes more secure via adoption in the block reward security model increasing. And so at the very moment when governments recognize Bitcoin as a threat to their existence, it'll be too strong, it'll be too large, and too integrated into the financial system to kill. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this. This was a fun article for me to write. A lot of people have asked me this question. If you have any other questions, feel free to reply in the comments. I'll go hop in and answer whatever questions you have. And always, feel free to subscribe to the newsletter. I do reply to every single email that's sent. So I hope you enjoyed. Cheers.